Carl, these are good stuff, and we have things now moving forward to think about on our
Yes.
apologetic work. I'd like to shift gears since you briefly mentioned the word incorporated, or in short, Inc. or INC.
Right. Right.
So, us being from the Philippines, it's inevitable that we talk about your debate with INC or
ANC.
Iglesia Ni Cristo. So, I know it's a long time, but let's take a trip down memory lane as we go back to
Okay.
all the fond memories of that debate. So, how was this experience, Carl? Do you have an insider story for us about the debate?
Well, I've been in a number of debates over the years, not in
Mm,
recent years, but I used to do quite a bit of debating. And
mm,
honestly, my debate against an Iglesia Ni Cristo minister was the
mm,
most unnerving public experience I've ever had. Uh, the debate was held in a high school gymnasium
mm,
about 10 miles from where I live. And it was in the summer, and the gymnasium held about 3,500 people. 3,000 of them were INC members who were bussed in from around Southern California.
uh,
Only 500 were Catholics or Protestants. And it was a very warm summer evening. And honestly, I think the interior of this gymnasium was so hot that I bet they had turned up the heat just to make me uncomfortable. But when I got up there, we had a large stage and a table for me at one side, a table for my opponent, who was a minister
yeah.
of the local Iglesia church. And then in between was the lectern from which we would take turns speaking. And when I sat down at my table and set up my notes and so on, there was a fellow who pulled up a folding chair near me. I said, "Who are you?" He said, "I'm your bodyguard." I said, "My what?" "I'm your bodyguard." I said, "When we have these debates in the Philippines and when they don't go well, sometimes our people storm the platform." I said, "Oh, well, that's very comforting." So it was a rather tense evening because I've never been in a position in public where there was any cause to be concerned about my own safety. But there was that night.
Wow. Yeah. To those who just heard about the debate just now, to the listeners who are not familiar with that debate, it's available in YouTube. So just search for the keyword Carl Keating versus INC debate. So it's easy to find. So
Actually, let me add this, if I may, Jake. It's
mm,
also available at Amazon as a Kindle book or a paperback book. I have the transcript of the debate in book form. It's fairly short, about 75 pages, and you can read it, obviously, in one evening because the debate took place in one evening. So you can either look at it, the video,
yeah.
or actually read it and then because then you'll see all the references that I have to scripture and so on. And you can make notes in the book,
Yeah.
whatever.
Yep. And when we were exchanging emails yesterday, I bought the book in Kindle and I read the debate. It's frustrating to read as much as frustrating to watch. The whole, let's say, stone and foundation stone exchange with Mr. Jose Ventilacion, so the guy from INC.
Right.
How
Yeah, it was frustrating for me because I had never been in a debate before or after where I was repeatedly interrupted by my opponent or by his friends. It was supposed to be just Mr. Ventilacion and me on the platform, but behind him, there was another table with two of his pals there. and they were going through books that had bookmarks in them, and they would rush up and show him a book where it had his talking points. And at one point, one of his friends started arguing with me. And I had to tell him to shut up. I'm not debating you, I'm debating Ventilacion. So it was a strange experience. But my goal in that debate wasn't to argue against INC's claims about the Catholic Church, because they're mostly ridiculous. What I really want to do to those 3,000 INC members who had been bussed in as audience members, I wanted to put doubts in their mind about their own church, about how it was started, and about the claims of Felix Manalo, the founder, about visions he supposedly had, and the sequence of events in terms of years of what really happened. I wanted to show them that their church was not what they thought it to be, at the same time as I tried to establish the bona fides of the Catholic Church.
Wow. You know, Carl, I really agree that it could be frustrating to deal with people from this organization. I was telling Jay before we start recording that at one point in my family's life, we were attending the activities of Iglesia Ni Cristo. I was reading the Pasugo magazine. I don't know if you have that in the US. And I really
yes, I did. Matter of fact, I referred to it in my debate.
Right. The God's Message in English. There's an English version of Pasugo for our listeners. And many of these people, I know a convert from Iglesia Ni Cristo. He's not public because his family would really be so mad at him. And this person, just before he converted, and he had to leave the country just to do that, his mom ran after him with a gun. And then the mom said, if you are going to become a Catholic, I just better kill you instead of you going to hell. You know, they could be that extreme. I'm not saying all of them are extreme, but many could be. So I'm just wondering, Carl, with your many years of experience dealing with the likes of Iglesia Ni Cristo, and I don't know if you have dealt with other organizations similar to that, which they have a revered founder and they think that they are the one true church and they teach stuff that are really new to our Christianity. What are your tips for ordinary Catholics so that they won't be swayed to join these organizations and believe their claims?
I have dealt with several similar organization burns. There's one here that came to me fairly recently called the World Mission Church of God.
Mm-hmm.
And it was founded in Korea. Mm-hmm. And its founders, a husband and wife, are actually revered by the members as God. Yes. So he's known as God the Father and she's known as God the Mother. He's passed away, she's still alive. Their theology has some similarities to Mormonism, some to the Jehovah's Witnesses, maybe even some to INC, but it's a very peculiar homegrown religion. But yes, the people of that church and the people of INC, and I choose my word carefully, they are actually members of cultic religious groups. These are a cult where they have a modern day founder who is revered and whose word is absolute gospel. And the people don't think through their positions. When I was in that debate with the INC minister, and I was up at the platform, I looked out at this vast audience of INC members. Honestly, to me, their eyes sort of looked like they were glazed over. They were simply absorbing everything he said without question, right, and didn't seem to have any ability to think through the counter arguments that I was making. So for me, that was a rather unnerving experience because I've dealt with many kinds of Protestant fundamentalists, many Protestants who are not fundamentalists. They give and take in a rational way. We disagree, but we're able to be working on the same kind of level intellectually, okay, logically. With this recent group I met, the World Mission Church of God, or Iglesia, I had a different feel, a different experience. Now with those kinds of groups, if you've got a family member who's maybe tempted to give them an ear, who's tempted to move in that direction, I don't think it does as much good to try to undermine the peculiar doctrines of those groups, although that's something you need to do. And I think the thing is to look first at their historical background. Where did they come from? Iglesia is only as old as 1914. That's hardly a century old. The Jehovah's Witnesses, 1879. Seventh-day Adventists, similar, you know. The Mormons, 1830. These are all relatively modern offshoots. Not one of them is authentically Christian in the sense of believing the basic historical tenets of Christianity, such as the Trinity and the divinity of Jesus Christ. Each of those groups denies some or many of the basic Christian teachings. So even though they call themselves Christian, technically they're not. But what you need to do when you talk to people who are either in those groups or are tempted to join those groups, I think the key thing is to take them on a by the hand and show them where those groups came from, what their history is, and why there is no connection to the historical Christian church. Now, each of those groups, for its own sake, has to claim that the original church funded by Christ apostatized in the first century, that it simply went out of business in the first century. And then for, say, 1700 years until Joseph Smith and the Mormons, or almost 18 and a half centuries with Felix Manalo and INC, there was no Christianity. It had disappeared. And then suddenly it comes back through these prophets. Well, then you've got to walk people through the words of Christ, who said that, I will be with you always, and that the gates of hell will not prevail. Well, if the church that he founded disappeared for hundreds of years, then he wasn't with us always. If it disappeared, then the gates of hell did prevail, right? So what does that mean? It means Jesus Christ was a liar. Do you think he's a liar? Well, if you say, yes, he's a liar, then he's not God. And then you might as well forget the whole thing. If you say, no, he's not a liar, he's God, then what he said must be true. And therefore, it's not possible for the church that he founded to have disappeared from this earth for 1800 years or what have you. Okay, not possible. So where was that church all that time? It can't be the INC, which only goes back 108 years. It can't be the Jehovah's Witnesses. It can't be the Mormons. When John Henry Newman, in the middle of the 19th century, was still a Protestant, a member of the Anglican Church. And while he was writing his most important book, his essay on the development of Christian doctrine, he was investigating, well, here's a doctrine that the Catholic Church holds today. Can I find it a century ago? Yes, I can. Can I find it a century before that? And a century before that? He was tracing doctrines all the way back to the first century. And he said, okay, I see them century by century. Yes, some of them look a bit different now, because you would expect that doctrine would become better understood as the centuries go by, as great minds put their minds to the faith. Frank Sheed said, Frank Sheed was the greatest apologist, I think, of the 20th century. He said, you cannot stop men from trying to draw true conclusions from true facts. So if we have the true facts of the life of Christ and what he taught, people will want to draw conclusions. So therefore, we understand, for example, the Trinity better today than did the Christians of the second century, because we've had Augustine and Aquinas and all these other great theologians during all these centuries getting us deeper into this truth of the faith. So anyway, Cardinal Newman worked backwards on all these Catholic beliefs, and he saw that they all went back to the first century, even if in the first century they were there only in a kind of germ format, just like a little seedling coming up. But a seedling that looks like a blade of grass could actually turn into an oak tree. Okay. But it's the same thing. It's like a human fetus becomes an old man once born if he lives long enough, right? They look entirely different, but it's the same person. And so it is with the church and its doctrines. They don't change in their substance, but they become better understood. And so when Newman saw that time after time, every time, in fact, anything that was distinctively Catholic, as distinguished from the beliefs he had as an Anglican, everything that was distinctively Catholic, whether church organization or doctrine or moral teaching or what have you, it all went back to the first century. And he said, that's the Catholic Church. All the way back, it's got this continuity that nobody else has. And by the time he finished writing that book, he became a Catholic. So it was church history, in essence, that brought him into the church. And I think that the same principle applies in a smaller scale to somebody who's in one of these groups or is tempted to join them, or at least give them an ear, show them that what the Catholic Church teaches goes all the way back, and what these other groups teach, their distinctive teachings, go back only a few lifetimes at most. And I think that realization can get people to a point of what they call cognitive dissonance, where
Right.
they don't know how to put
Mm.
things together in their head. And then they begin to think, okay, well, if what Felix Manalo taught wasn't taught by anybody before his time, this particular combination of doctrines, maybe that means he made them up.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And then what does that mean? Okay, and then you begin to work from there. So I think when dealing with these groups, especially these more sectarian ones that are that even don't consider themselves Protestant, okay, it's very useful to make the historical argument, their history versus our history.
Makes a lot of sense, Carl. And I like it when you said something, take them by the hand. In Unboxing Catholicism, we really teach people to engage in dialogue. And, doctrine, dialogue, and discernment, they go hand in hand together. As Pope Francis said, we need to accompany people. So it's a journey, it's accompaniment. So thank you for that reminder, Carl.
It's an important thing, too, that we use terminology that not only they can understand, but is precise. Okay, so that we don't leave them with something that's rather mushy and easily discarded.
Right.
For example, on the doctrine of the Trinity, I'll go back to Frank Sheed here. He mentioned not using the symbolism, for example, of the shamrock, which a lot of Irish-born priests used to use in this country when they came to America to, become pastors out here. They would have the three-leaf shamrock and say, well, the three leaves are like the three persons of the Trinity, and the one stem is like the one nature of the Godhead. But Sheed said, I think very perceptively, he said, the shamrock does not help you understand the Trinity. It only helps you swallow the Trinity.
Oh.
Okay. You think that you're making an argument that will convince people, but actually it doesn't do anything for them interiorly, but it satisfies you and you can walk away. You need a more substantial argument to explain what the Trinity is and what we mean by three divine persons, one divine nature, right? So we need to use our terms in our images, for example, in a careful way so that we're accurate and that we leave people with ideas that actually will be burrowing into their minds and make them think after they've gone home and we're no longer around, So we want to be very careful about that.
Hi, this is Jay Aruga of the Jay Aruga Show. If you like what you just saw, please consider subscribing and smash that like button. We'll need all of your help to take back the culture from this ideological colonization of the West. Thank you.